Welcome back, everyone. Settle in. Wherever you are right now, whether you're driving on a long stretch of highway, nursing a cup of coffee at your kitchen table, or just walking your dog in the quiet of the morning, I want you to tune out the noise of the world for a little while. Today, we are going deep. We are diving into a profoundly moving piece of literature, a collection of narratives from the Seeds for the Soul series. Specifically a book titled For Women. Now, before you think, "Oh, I'm not a woman, this isn't for me," let me stop you right there. This isn't just a book about women. This is a masterclass on the human condition. It is a brilliant, analytical look at love, sacrifice, grief, and the quiet, uncelebrated heroism that actually keeps the fabric of our society from completely unraveling. The core philosophy of this book is introduced almost immediately, on page 3, with a simple but incredibly difficult mandate. Always be yourself and never give up on your dreams. It sounds like a bumper sticker, right? But as we unpack the stories within these pages, you'll see that this phrase is actually a radical battle cry. The book is dedicated to anyone facing spiritual challenges, offering these deeply personal stories as a wellspring of faith and resilience. But what fascinates me the most is the central thesis introduced in the opening pages. The author puts forth an argument about heroism. In our culture, we tend to celebrate the loud achievements. We build statues for generals, we put billionaires on magazine covers, we applaud the doctors, the entrepreneurs, the politicians. But this text argues that the true, undeniable nobility of women, and by extension, the most profound nobility of humanity, is found in everyday life. It is silent. It is anonymous. But it is foundational. Women, the text argues, are born to love, to contribute, and to sacrifice. And that love is the ultimate, alternative treatment for the brutal hardships of life. Why does this matter? Because we live in a world that constantly tells us that our quiet, domestic struggles don't count. But this book flips that script. It takes the macro and makes it micro, starting with the psychological tension of motherhood. Let me tell you about a story in the book called I Dreamt of Shauna. I want you to picture a mother, standing in her home, watching her 16-year-old son, Jake. Jake is lanky, awkward, stepping right onto the threshold of manhood, and he is getting ready for an in-person meeting with a girl named Shauna, whom he met online. Now, if you are a parent, or if you've ever loved anyone fiercely, you know the exact cocktail of emotions this mother is feeling. The book describes it as a borderline between jealousy and a lack of faith. It's a brilliant articulation. She is terrified. She is afraid her son will be hurt, manipulated, or, perhaps the deepest, most unspeakable fear of all, that this new girl will replace her influence. It's the terrifying realization that your child's heart is walking outside of your body, totally unprotected. But then, the mother has a dream. She dreams of Shauna, but in the dream, Shauna is physically imperfect, awkward, flawed. And in that subconscious moment, the mother has a revelation. She realizes that her son's journey toward love, and yes, his inevitable journey toward heartbreak, is not something to be prevented. It is a necessary rite of passage. It is the fire he must walk through to become a man. So, when the real Shauna arrives at the door, bright and friendly, the mother is able to do the hardest thing in the world: she lets go. She overcomes her deep, primal desire to control the situation. The profound lesson here is that parental love has to evolve. It must transition from being a shield of protection to an open door of acceptance. If you never let the child risk the heartbreak, you never let them live. And speaking of the evolution of love, the book transitions seamlessly into a story called The Call of Love, which completely shatters a massive societal myth about family. We have this cultural expectation that the moment you become a mother, or in this case, a grandmother, a biological switch flips in your brain and you are instantly flooded with this pure, unadulterated, magical joy. But what if you aren't? What if you feel nothing but awkwardness? The narrator of this story becomes a grandmother, and confesses to feeling clumsy, unfit, and totally lacking in that instant joy everyone talks about. Think about the guilt associated with that. But the text makes a brilliant philosophical argument. Emotional bonds are built through shared experience, not biological titles. The title of grandmother doesn't magically bestow love, it merely provides the opportunity to build it. And build it she does, not through grand gestures, but through the mundane magic of childhood. They read books together. They build sprawling cardboard castles. They talk to the grandson's imaginary friend, Mowgli. And by the time the boy is 4 years old, she realizes her heart is completely overflowing. Why does this matter? Because it gives us permission to be human. It tells us that identity, whether it's maternal, grandmaternal, or anything else, is a cultivated emotional landscape. It is a garden you have to plant and water, not a light switch you just flick on. This idea of looking past the superficial to find the profound is beautifully illustrated in another narrative called True Beauty. I love this story because it plays out like a cinematic short film. The narrator is sitting in a small, quiet cafe on the anniversary of her father's death. She is in a reflective, vulnerable state, and she observes two completely different couples. The first couple is what society tells us we should aspire to be. They are young, physically stunning, impeccably dressed. They look like they stepped out of a fashion magazine. But as the narrator watches them, she realizes they are completely disconnected. They sit in silence, mechanical, cold. The author describes them as marble statues. Beautiful to look at, but hard, cold, and entirely lifeless. Then, there is the second couple. They are older. The man is wearing mismatched clothes, looking a bit disheveled. His wife has severe physical deformities, missing forearms, stunted fingers. By society's superficial standards, they are entirely flawed. But look at how they interact. The older man proudly shows off a faded, heart-shaped pin that his wife gave him 40 years ago. They are laughing, whispering, leaning into each other with this undeniable, magnetic warmth. Their relationship is alive. Sitting in that cafe, the narrator remembers a piece of wisdom from her late father. The sweetest fruit is often the one with flaws. It's a brilliant metaphor. Think about the perfectly symmetrical, genetically modified apple at the grocery store that tastes like water, versus the bruised, misshapen heirloom apple from a farmer's market that explodes with flavor. True beauty, the story argues, isn't found in physical symmetry or cold perfection. It is found in the imperfections of long-term devotion. It's found in the friction of life, the scars we accumulate, and the emotional warmth that endures long after youth has faded. Now, up to this point, the book has been very intimate, focusing on the micro level of family and personal observation. But then, it does something wildly ambitious. It takes these private, feminine virtues and projects them onto a global, macro scale in an essay titled, If Grandmothers Led the World. I want you to really entertain this hypothetical for a second. What if the world wasn't run by ego-driven politicians, military generals, and corporate titans? What if the globe was governed by a council of grandmothers? The text argues that grandmothers are the secret weapon of human progress. Why? Because their hierarchy of values is completely different. They prioritize tradition, family unity, and nurturing over conflict, dominance, and ego. Imagine a world where diplomacy is handled the way a grandmother handles a family dispute. The author paints these incredible, slightly humorous but deeply poignant geopolitical scenarios. Bosnia and Serbia settling their differences over a pot of tea. Mexico and the U.S. ignoring border walls and instead focusing on child adoption and community care. Palestine and Israel praying together before sitting down to untangle the Gaza issue. Asia sharing origami secrets and cooking tips. The argument is that if grandmothers ruled, the great wars of history, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, would simply not have happened. Why? Because no grandmother is going to send her grandchild to die for a line on a map. No grandmother would permit terrorism or starvation. because they are fundamentally wired to ensure that every child in the community has a warm bed and a bedtime story. The author cites a specific example. Great-grandmother Sewell, who used a simple, affectionate phrase, "Where's my hug?" as the ultimate negotiation tactic to end any argument. It sounds quaint, almost naive, until you really think about the psychology behind it. The feminine instinct to preserve life, to nurture the global home, is presented as the ultimate antidote to the masculine instinct for war and conquest. But this matriarchal wisdom isn't just about preventing war, it's about how we cultivate the human mind. This brings us to a fascinating segment of the book that redefines the true meaning of education, titled, "How Important is a Degree?" We meet a woman named Terry. At 14 years old, Terry looks at the traditional school system and realizes it is stifling her. She's bored. She feels like she's being forced into a factory line, categorized by arbitrary grades. Questioning why she needs to learn advanced math when she hasn't even figured out the basics of life. So, against the immense pressure of her parents and society, she drops out of school just 6 months before high school graduation. Now, society has a very specific script for dropouts, and Terry initially falls victim to it. The lack of that piece of paper, that degree, becomes a heavy chain around her neck. Her self-esteem plummets. She makes poor life choices, enters into a bad marriage, takes unsuitable jobs. All because she allows a short sentence, by society, to define her entire worth. She internalized the lie that without institutional validation, she was nothing. But the turning point comes when she meets her second husband, a man who doesn't look at her academic record, but looks at her mind. He sees her raw, innate intelligence. With his support, Terry reclaims her confidence and makes a radical decision: she is going to homeschool her children. And in teaching them, she heals herself. They don't sit in sterile classrooms under fluorescent lights. They go to ponds to study biology in the mud. They study history by getting their hands dirty, making clay bowls and faux raccoon hats. Through this deeply tactile, intimate process of teaching, Terry realizes a profound truth: education is a personal pursuit of knowledge. It is something you find for yourself, it is not something imposed upon you by an institution. The section ends with this incredibly moving moment where her son defends her to a peer, looking them dead in the eye and saying that even without a degree, his mother is capable of absolutely anything. Why does this matter? Because we live in a world obsessed with credentials. We confuse schooling with education. Terry's story is a powerful reminder that curiosity, resilience, and hands-on experience are the true markers of an educated mind. This theme of redefining the structure of our lives carries over beautifully into the next story. Christmas is Still There, which deals with the evolution of family traditions. I want you to imagine a couple who, for 35 years, have had a house full of chaos, children, and noise every single Christmas. But this year, for the first time, the children can't come home. One is pregnant, the other is tied up with work. The parents are devastated. They are staring down the barrel of an empty nest, and their initial reaction is despair. They think, without the family here, there is no Christmas. Let's just skip it. Have you ever felt that? That if the form of a tradition changes, the substance is somehow ruined? But then, the daughter asks them a simple question over the phone. What did you do before you had us? That question is a revelation. It jolts the couple out of their parental identity and back into their foundational identity as a couple. They realize they don't need a crowd to celebrate. They return to the simple, quiet rituals. They bake. They gather greenery from their own garden. They put on Bing Crosby. They go to Midnight, Massachusetts. And in that empty house, they don't find loneliness. They find a holy quiet. A new peace. They realize that the spirit of the tradition was never lost, and it wasn't dependent on the noise. It was simply waiting for them in the quiet moments. But maintaining that quiet connection with a partner isn't always easy, which leads us directly into the story called The greeting card. This piece is a masterclass on the silent distance that can creep into a long-term marriage. We are looking at a couple who have been married for 7 years. They used to be so in sync they could read each other's minds. But now, they are just roommates passing in the hallway. They work opposite shifts, he works days, she works nights. Their deep conversations have devolved into shallow, scripted exchanges about traffic and what's in the fridge for dinner. The psychological toll of this is heavy. The wife is harboring this growing, hidden anger. She spends an hour in a card shop, agonizing over finding the exact right card, a card that expresses her fear of losing him, but also her desperate commitment to reheating their relationship. On the morning of their anniversary, she leaves the card out for him. Later, when she wakes up, she walks out to find a card he has left for her. She opens it, and it is the exact same card. Think about the astronomical odds of that. Out of thousands of cards in the city, they both, independently, spent the time to find the exact same articulation of their hidden pain and their enduring love. This miraculous coincidence completely shatters the silence between them. They both take the day off, they sit down, they talk, they laugh, and they reconnect. The profound lesson here is that even when you are exhausted, even when the daily grind has worn you down to a nub, the soul connection can still survive. But it requires an intentional act to wake it up. And sometimes, the things we have to wake up from are nightmares. This brings us to what is arguably the most emotionally heavy and beautiful story in this collection. A New Dawn. This is a story about the agonizing intersection of past tragedy and future hope. The narrator of this story is a mother who is carrying an unimaginable grief. 4 years ago, she lost her 17-year-old daughter, Dawn, in a horrific car accident. The grief was so absolute, so suffocating, that she admits she wanted to die with her. Now, 4 years later, her surviving daughter, Laura, is pregnant. And Laura announces that if the baby is a girl, she is going to name her Dawn, in honor of her late sister. I want you to put yourself in that mother's shoes. Her reaction is incredibly complex and deeply human. She is horrified. The idea of hearing the name, Dawn Michelle, every single day, of calling a new baby by the name of her dead teenager, feels like a psychological trigger she cannot digest. It feels like taking a wound that is just barely beginning to scar over and ripping it wide open. But then comes the day of the birth. Laura goes into a grueling, agonizing 2-day labor that ultimately ends in a terrifying emergency C-section. Throughout this entire ordeal, the grandmother is right there by her side, massaging her, whispering to her, holding her through the terror. And then, the moment arrives. The baby is pulled from the womb. A healthy, red, screaming baby girl. The doctors place this new life onto Laura's chest, and in that split second, the tension in the room shatters. Both mother and daughter burst into tears, not of grief, but of profound relief and joy. And as the grandmother looks at this tiny, breathing miracle, the name, Dawn, undergoes a miraculous transmutation. It stops being a symbol of a horrific car crash. It stops being an anchor to the grave. It becomes, quite literally, a new dawn. It transitions from a monument of death to a living, breathing testament of new life. This idea of the dead carrying us forward into new life is perfectly echoed in the final section of our journey today. Starting with a story set on a freezing Vermont ski trip. The narrator is a widow, having recently lost her husband, Ben. The family is struggling. They are trying to figure out how to navigate the world with this gaping hole in their center. They are on the ski slopes, and the narrator is wearing Ben's old, oversized winter coat, wrapping herself in the physical memory of him. She reaches into the pocket looking for a tissue, but her fingers brush against something else. A 3x5 index card. Now, Ben was a man known for making lists on these little index cards. Her heart starts to pound. She pulls it out, and written in Ben's handwriting is a simple note. Vermont, keep it if you can. It is a direct message from the grave. It's an instruction, a blessing, a piece of guidance left behind in the pocket of a coat. In that freezing mountain air, the emotional shift is palpable. The narrator suddenly feels Ben's presence all around them. The terrifying, looming fear of the future is instantly replaced by a deep sense of peace, a warm space, in the cold. The family makes the decision right then and there. They will keep the Vermont home. They ski down the mountain, and the tears freezing on their cheeks are no longer tears of despair, they are tears of hope. Ben is still guiding them. Why does this matter? Because it tells us that grief is not the end of a relationship, it is simply a change in its format. The signs are there, if we are willing to put our hands in the pockets of the past and read them. And finally, we close with a story that perfectly encapsulates the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of family love. It's a story called My Aunt Honey. Now, when we think of love, we usually think of softness. We think of warm cookies and gentle hugs. But Aunt Honey is not soft. She is described as the most difficult woman you've ever met. She has a raspy voice. She demands absolute, pin-drop silence when she speaks. She rules her domain with an absolute iron fist. The story details her eccentricities, particularly her terrifying summer house inspections. She would descend upon the house, scrutinizing every corner, imposing rigorous discipline. But the brilliance of this story is how it reframes that harshness. As the narrator grows up, they realize that Aunt Honey's iron fist wasn't about tyranny. It was about fierce, unyielding protection. It was an eccentric, tough love designed to forge discipline and resilience in her family. It teaches us that love doesn't always come in a pastel, Hallmark card package. Sometimes, love is loud, demanding, and intensely difficult. But it is love nonetheless, holding the family structure together like rebar in concrete. So, where does that leave us? As we pull back and look at this massive tapestry of stories from the Seeds for the Soul series, a crystal clear picture emerges. We've traveled from the macro perspective of grandmothers running the world, down to the micro perspectives of a mother letting go of her teenage son. A dropout finding her worth, a couple finding their spark in a duplicate greeting card, and a grieving family finding a message in an old winter coat. Every single one of these narratives reinforces the exact same profound truth. En hung Dieu ben dit. The simple things. A hug. A handmade clay bowl. A shared cup of tea. A faded heart-shaped pin. An index card. These are not just the background details of a life. They are the absolute foundational elements of a meaningful existence. The heroism of the ordinary is the only thing that truly saves us. Thank you for going on this deep dive with me today. I hope you walk away from this episode looking at your own life, your own quiet, mundane, beautifully flawed life, and realize the immense nobility within it. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. Keep finding the sweet fruit, flaws and all.